let's debunk some paleo debunking. As the paleo diet movement has grown, it has also become increasingly difficult to talk about at times. This is because there is no single set of guidelines for what constitutes the paleo diet, and as it grows in popularity, the variants continue to pile on. This is both a strength and a weakness. It's a strength because, like any legitimate field of study, there's always more to learn. With near infinite variables, the unknowns always outweigh the knowns. As we learn more, we can modify basic starting point macro guidelines and then the micro guidelines at the individual level. It also makes the field more inclusive as far as people trying new things, researching new areas, and hopefully adding to the overall body of knowledge. This uncertainty and malleability is also a weakness, though. For example, the media latches on to the most flamboyant imagery and ratings-grabbing sound bites when describing the paleo diet. Attacking the paleo approach is also easier because, with many versions to choose from, it is quite easy to cherry-pick the weakest features from the weakest and often outdated sources, and then to simply do battle against this hastily constructed straw man. In Dr. Christina Warinner's recent TEDx talk, she did a great job of ignoring the strengths of the paleo approach, arguing against some straw man tenets, and then providing her own dietary advice, which happens to line up very neatly with what most paleo eaters try to practice themselves. As Rob Wolf points out in a recent blog post, quote, "This is possibly nitpicky on my part, but getting a PhD from Harvard, I think Professor Warinner picked fad in lieu of trend for a bit more pop. It's kind of a bummer, as right out of the gate, one is feeling a bit set upon if you were rooting for an evolution-based dietary template to make some headway into academia." End quote.
I'm an archaeological scientist, and I study the health and dietary histories of ancient peoples using bone biochemistry and ancient DNA. And I'm here today because I want to talk to you about the paleo diet. It's one of America's fastest growing diet fads. The main idea behind it is that the key to longevity and optimal health is to abandon our modern agricultural diets, which make us ill, and move far back in time to our Paleolithic ancestors more than 10,000 years ago and eat like them.
According to Merriam-Webster, a fad is a practice or interest followed for a time with exaggerated zeal. Now, nearly all approaches to health and well-being can be practiced faddishly by end users, but in the case of paleo, there's also a sizable scientific community behind the approach. The big umbrella idea is that of evolutionary health, nutrition, and fitness. See, there's a baby in the bathwater, but Warinner seems to completely ignore it.
So what I want to talk to you about today is that this version of the paleo diet that's promoted in popular books, on TV, on self-help websites, and in the overwhelming majority of press has no basis in archaeological reality.
Well, that's a broad list of general sources, and she doesn't actually say whether she's read any of the books. This potentially explains why she lays out such a caricatured version of paleo. Here's what I mean.
So myth one is that humans are evolved to eat meat, and that Paleolithic peoples consumed large quantities of meat.
Now, Warinner starts her paleo myth-busting by contrasting human beings to carnivores. Unlike carnivores, she tells us we can't synthesize our own vitamin C, our intestinal tracts are much longer, some of us have adapted to milk consumption, but not meat consumption, and we have generalist teeth that aren't specialized for shredding meat. Well, first of all, who is arguing that human beings are carnivores? Virtually no one who is taken seriously, that's who. Yet based on this presentation, one who doesn't know otherwise might easily assume that the paleo approach presupposes or argues that human beings are, or ought to be, carnivores. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. Human beings are omnivores, like all primates. And heck, even deer will partake in the occasional injured bird as seen in that famous YouTube video. Now, humans have no teeth for meat shredding? Listen to a few moments of this program from the BBC and decide for yourself whether this issue of meat shredding dentition is as black and white as Dr. Warinner would lead us to believe.
Oh, this is a great collection.
Thank you.
Dr. Peter Ungar is a world authority on our ancestors' faces and teeth. He's been looking at how a changing diet might have affected the shape of our ancestors' jaws. To see how well our teeth and jaws are adapted to eating meat, we're going to put them to the test with a machine designed by Jean-François Molinet, one of Peter's colleagues. Known as the Bite Master, this machine uses a sophisticated array of motors to precisely mimic a natural chewing action. First, we try the large, flat teeth of Australopithecus. I'm slightly nervous about this because it did look quite vicious. Okay.
That should do it.
Would they have been able to chew through meat?
Well, it hasn't actually bitten through, it's just kind of squashed it.
Compressed it. Well, those teeth aren't very well suited for shearing or slicing through tough foods like meat. It's kind of like pound a steak with a hammer.
So, if our early ancestors' teeth can't cut it with meat, let's see what 3 million years of evolution have done for meat eating, with a cast of my teeth.
It feels quite odd to see my own teeth going into this machine.
You want to see what it does with a piece of meat?
Yeah, I'm vegetarian though. I wonder if I've got meat-eating teeth.
Let's give it a shot.
Shall we have a try?
Good job.
Yeah, you can see it slicing through. That's amazing. Take this piece of meat out now. And that is amazing. You can actually, it hasn't quite pierced through, but you can see the light through that piece of meat now.
Absolutely.
Wow.
The smaller, sharper teeth that evolved in all our mouths seem well adapted to shearing through the tough muscle fibres of meat.
And these are the teeth of a vegetarian, by choice.
By choice. Not by evolution.
Well, there you have it. And then after telling us that there's no anatomical, physiological, or genetic adaptations to meat consumption, Dr. Warinner goes on to say, there is more evidence of meat eating in our ancient ancestors than plant eating, but because bones preserve better than plants. Organ meats would have been eaten, perhaps preferred over muscle meat. The meat that was eaten was not from commercially fattened cows. More meat would have been eaten in Arctic regions than in tropical regions. Okay, and this differs with the paleo approach exactly how? Far from being different, this is precisely what many influencers in the paleo community have said for years. There is perhaps disagreement as to how much meat we should be eating in macronutrient ratios, healthy disagreement. But all of these points that Warinner is making are clearly built into the basic framework of the paleo approach.
So myth 2 is that Paleolithic peoples did not eat whole grains or legumes.
Look, this is nothing new. In fact, the last time this was made into a big deal was 2010, and I talked about it on This Week in Paleo, Episode 8, Paleogate. That was the predecessor to this show. Warinner covers old ground when she tells us there is 30,000-year-old evidence of grain grinding tools. We know that. Of course, the ground-up grains could have been used for some home-brewed chicha, medicinal concoctions, or for some food. The thing is, there is no evidence of grain being a staple food in pre-agricultural times, and that seems quite unlikely. From this assertion, the evolutionary approach hypothesizes that vastly increased grain consumption could be problematic. Fast forward to Paleo 2013, and many of us considered non-gluten-containing grains and starches excellent sources of energy, in the form of sweet potatoes, yams, rice, and potatoes anyway, unless there are underlying medical conditions that provide reasons for avoiding them. The paleo approach does not exclude foods grown on Neolithic branches of the tree of knowledge. There is instead a proceed with caution warning applied to them. For example, I fully understand that corn tortillas, 3 ingredients, corn, water, and lime, might do me in, but I take that occasional risk anyway, because it's worth having a damn fine plate of fajitas once in a while, especially since I estimate this occasional risk to be nearly zero. On the other hand, the keeled over cramps that I experience when eating a bit of bread or a splash of malt vinegar, that tells me to stay away from those all of the time. Seed oils, there's zero upside. They don't taste good, they don't help with body composition, they don't provide any psychological reward, so why bother with them? No upside plus risk is a fool's game. This is what I consider the applied paleo approach at the individual level.
So myth 3 is that paleo diet foods in the diet, fad diet, are what our Paleolithic ancestors ate.
Now, this reminds me of the purveyors of processed food telling us that everything is processed. And if you haven't read this article yet, you can check it out at humansarnotbroken.com. So by their logic, if everything is processed, we can't help but eat processed foods. In fact, we shouldn't even think in terms of processed versus not processed, because that would be pointless if everything's processed. Well, with this myth, Dr. Warinner is telling us the same thing. We have no access to Paleolithic era foods that actually existed during the Paleolithic era. So it is impossible to eat a paleo diet. Today we have domesticated Neolithic foods. Game over. No white dotted one-up green mushroom for you. You're stuck here in the Neolithic milieu along with the rest of us. Bananas can't even breed anymore. They're all genetic clones grown from clippings. Wild bananas are fibrous and nasty, hardly recognizable as food by modern people. Wild lettuce is full of latex and difficult to digest. We've bred toxins right out of many plants, like tomatoes, to make them edible. And on top of that, Paleolithic people could never have squeezed oil out of olives. They couldn't have eaten anything but local foods. They couldn't have eaten eggs every day year-round. Broccoli didn't exist in the Paleolithic, and carrots were gross. Okay, therefore I should just eat a bowl of cornflakes, some ding-dongs, and some Gatorade. Pretending that this is Warinner's conclusion is about as fair as Dr. Warinner pretending that promoters of an evolutionary approach to nutrition conclude that somehow the foods we eat today are identical to what our Paleolithic ancestors were eating. This is her straw man, not ours. Can we all just agree that there are degrees ranging from naturally occurring foods to highly processed foods, and that judging the value of these foods solely through the lens of nutritionism is the wrong way to go about it? Lately, I've been eating much less muscle meat, maybe a few times a week in small portions. I also eat goat liver and fatty fish frequently. Our soups start with bone broths that are made from grass-fed cows and bug-eating chickens. I do eat nutrient-rich eggs almost daily, and I also eat more vegetables than most vegetarians. Is this not an evolutionary approach to food choice? Does my diet really need to be debunked? Now that she's tore down her version of the paleo diet, let's see how Dr. Warinner recommends that we should eat, based on what she calls the archaeological evidence.
I think there's three main lessons we can learn. First, there's no one correct diet, but diversity is the key. So depending on where you live, you can eat very different things. But you need diversity. We lack the ability to synthesize many nutrients that we require for life, nutrients and vitamins, and we require to get them from our foods. So eating a diet that's rich in species, has high species diversity, is very important. Now, unfortunately, in American diets today, the trend is going the opposite direction. If you go and you take a processed food off a grocery store shelf, it doesn't really matter if it's cake batter, mayonnaise, or coffee creamer. Increasingly, there's only 3 species in almost everything we eat. You have corn, soy, and wheat.
Quit eating just corn, wheat, and soy? Oh, that's no problem for a paleo eater. Let's just say we go ahead and give up the wheat and soy altogether and save the corn for that occasional plate of previously mentioned low-risk fajitas. I would say that puts my version of paleo and Warinner's version of the archaeological diet pretty close together so far. Eat a diverse diet? Okay, how about a diet that includes fresh vegetables and fruits, naturally raised and wild meats, fish, organ meats, bone-based broths that include the marrow, some nuts and seeds, some tubers, fermented vegetables and beverages, eggs, low-processed fats and oils, a rainbow of natural spices and herbs that have therapeutic effects but can also transform food into meals, cuisine, and even art. Simply put, I've never eaten such a diverse selection of foods as I have on my paleo-inspired diet. Now sure, sometimes we hear about paleo dieters veering off into the meat-only spectrum of real food, and I tend to shake my head a bit when I hear about it, but that's not what defines the paleo diet or the diets of most of us who are inspired by evolutionary health, nutrition, and fitness.
Second, we evolved to eat fresh foods in season when they're ripe. That's when they have their highest nutritional content. But of course, we have to also talk about food storage and preservatives, because in large urban societies, you can't always eat everything fresh. Food spoils. Some foods preserve naturally well. These include things like seeds and nuts, and that's why traditionally they've been so important to agricultural populations. But we can preserve them in other ways. Through salting, through sugar, through vinegar, we can pickle them, we can smoke them, we can dry them, and we can add artificial preservatives. Now, what I find very interesting about this is that these all work in the same way. They work by inhibiting bacterial growth. But we have to keep in mind that our gastrointestinal systems are also full of bacteria, good bacteria, that do many good things for you. They digest your food, they regulate your immune system, they promote mucosal function. If you're eating foods full of preservatives, how does that affect your microbiome, your good bacteria within you? And the answer is we really don't know, and it's something we're only starting to investigate.
Again, how is this not paleo? One of the evolutionary advantages of color vision is being able to easily discern ripe and unripe foods. Is Dr. Warinner not hypothesizing here that our Paleolithic ancestors practiced this discernment and that we should too? Well, welcome to the paleo approach. And as far as minding your microbiome and avoiding preservatives, only card-holding Weston A. Price Foundation members seem to think more about their gut flora than do paleo eaters. So lesson 2 amounts to more paleo diet advice.
And third, we evolved to eat whole foods in their complete package with their fiber and their roughage and everything. It turns out this is really important, that your foods are not just the sum of the calories and the vitamins, but even the parts you can't digest are very important. The fiber that you eat regulates the speed at which the food travels through your gut. It modulates metabolism. It slows down the release of sugars. It has all sorts of functions. It feeds the good bacteria that live in your gut.
And if the paleo diet tells us anything, is this not it? The paleo diet is now perhaps the leading movement in the world advocating the consumption of whole, real foods. And it is the latest research, along with our intuitions as human animals, if you ask me, that tells us food is more than the sum of calories and nutrients. This is precisely why for the last 3 years I've been describing the paleo approach as being at the intersection of scientific evidence and evolutionary clues. Dr. Warinner tells us we are eating more calories in smaller packages. Processed foods are short-circuiting our ability to know when we're full. A 32-ounce soda contains 8 feet of sugarcane minus the fiber. That decoupling whole foods from nutrients tricks our bodies. Again, as someone who has talked about these issues for years, why exactly is Dr. Warinner debunking the paleo diet and not simply promoting an evolutionary approach to food choice? Offering 3 paleo diet lessons in a presentation aimed at debunking the paleo diet is at the very least bad form, or some really awesome jujitsu, depending on how you look at it. I hope it has become evident that Dr. Christina Warinner does not grasp the paleo diet circa 2013. Some of her so-called myths are well known and have been discussed extensively and synthesized within the paleo approach. Others, like that humans are not adapted to eat meat, are either nonsense or not the settled science that she portrays. Dr. Warinner's lessons for eating, on the other hand, are indeed core tenets of the paleo approach for myself as well as most of the practitioners I have met over the years. Something about Dr. Warinner's presentation makes me uneasy beyond what I've already talked about in this article, and that is this. If she did the due diligence required to debunk a set of ideas on a semi-worldwide stage, how is it that she would not mention the similarities between the paleo diet and her own recommendations? It is my familiarity with the subject matter that leads me to say yes, I can see how the paleo movement can be a bit confusing and less than perfect. The marketing alliance with the low-carb community has muddied some of the waters. Some of the paleo cookbooks and recipe sites have helped us to become what I call too good at paleo. There is some infighting that becomes overly dramatic at times. We're a mix of jocks and bookworms and obese and formerly obese and newbie zealots and old hands passing through many phases of health and recovery that lead to new personal discoveries. So yeah, there is no one paleo neck to choke. With near infinite variables and billions of people, perhaps this is the best that we can hope for. And I'm okay with that. As soon as we have the paleo diet TM for everyone, I will wholeheartedly agree that we're eyebrow deep in fad territory. As it stands, we're perhaps only ankle deep. It slows us down a bit, but it's still not difficult to make progress. Even if it sounds quaint, I'll say it anyway. Eating real food is helping a lot of people. Ultimately, Dr. Warinner is telling paleo dieters nothing new, but she does provide some fantastic advice for her TEDx audience, live and online. I hope they implement all 3 of her lessons. Whether or not they call it a paleo or an evolutionary approach to making their food choices is of little consequence. And as for us, well, this debunking doesn't really matter. You can still find real food at your farmer's market, at the grocery store, and even in your backyard. So I hope these views have given you some things to consider and think about. I do encourage you to check out her full talk. The link is in the story, which you can get in the show notes. She really did get into some cherry picking to make her case, and she ignored much of the weaknesses in her own position. But guess what? That's pretty normal, and it can be difficult to see in ourselves. I've pointed out what I see as big flaws in her arguments, some more egregious than others. I'm sure some people can find flaws in my counter-arguments, but that's good. Let's keep the conversation going. And I will concede one thing. When you do a quick search for what the paleo diet is, you could easily come to the same conclusions Warinner did. So like it or not, accurate or not, Her presentation of what paleo is quite likely shared by many, and it should be viewed as a problem.